In today's video, we will be discussing the relevance of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code and the reasons why it was brought in place in India. This video is pertinent as this is going to form the basis and the perfect launchpad to understand the further videos where we will discuss the provisions and case laws related to IBC. So what is the purpose of an insolvency regime? Broadly speaking, an effective insolvency regime serves two fundamental purposes. Number one, ensuring the availability of credit. Businesses require credit, which is the backbone of economy. While banks and financial institutes are the primary providers of loans, suppliers and service providers also extend credit in various forms. A robust insolvency regime provides confidence to the creditors that they have a fair mechanism to recover their dues. Number two, managing business failures equitably. Business failures are inevitable in any economy. An insolvency framework ensures a fair and structured process that balances the interest of all the stakeholders, enabling either revival through resolution or an orderly liquidation process of the corporate debtor. Therefore, the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code of 2016 has been designed to create such a regime in India. Before the IBC, India neither had an efficient rescue mechanism nor a satisfactory exit route for businesses. The IBC offers a market-directed, time-bound mechanism to resolve insolvency wherever possible or exit where required. In the pre-IBC era, India had a fragmented and inefficient insolvency framework. Various laws and systems governed insolvency and bankruptcy, but they were often outdated, cumbersome, and slow. Here is a breakdown of the key frameworks that were in place before the IBC, along with the challenges and issues associated with each of them. One of the avenues for the creditors in the pre-IBC era was via individual recovery actions. Creditors could initiate individual recovery actions against the corporate debtors either through civil court cases or by invoking arbitration clauses if present in the contract. Let us understand that by way of an example. Say for instance, there was a company which had a loan of 100 crores with 10 different creditors and it defaults and becomes an insolvent company. In such a case, in the pre-IBC era, what used to happen was that all the different creditors from banks to vendors would file different individual suits and in some cases arbitration proceedings at different forums. This mechanism caused various issues. Number one, inequitable outcomes. These actions often led to inequitable outcomes, especially for smaller creditors, as the cases were decided on case-by-case basis. Wealthier creditors could afford prolonged litigation, while the smaller ones were left with limited recourse. Second one being delays and uncertainty. The process of filing a recovery suit in the court was lengthy and uncertain, often taking several years before a decision could be made, which delayed recovery and worsened the financial distress. Also, the lack of coordination amongst the creditors. Individual recovery actions were disjointed and creditors did not have a mechanism to coordinate efforts. This often resulted in an inconsistent enforcement and outcomes. Another framework was winding up under the Companies Act of 1956. Under Section 433 of the old Companies Act, a company could be wound up by a court order which typically involved appointing an official liquidator to manage the company's assets and liabilities. However, the drawback of this mechanism was that A, there was no recovery mechanism for creditors. The primary drawback of this provision was that it did not provide a structured mechanism for creditors to recover their dues. Once the company was ordered to wind up, the focus shifted to liquidation rather than addressing the claims of creditors. And this was a prolonged process, so the winding up process was slow, taking on an average of 10 years from the filing of the winding up petition to the actual dissolution of the company. During this period, the creditors were left in limbo with no clear recourse. Also, due to the prolonged timelines, the assets of the company were often eroded, reducing the potential value that could have been recovered by the creditors. Then we also had the mechanism of recovery under the DRT, that is the Debt Recovery Tribunal under the SARFAESI Act. The DRT was established to deal with recovery suits filed by secure creditors such as banks under the SARFAESI Act of the year 2002. It allowed creditors to seize and sell their corporate debtors' assets in case of a default. However, the DRT and SARFAESI Act were available only to secured creditors, which meant that unsecured creditors like operational creditors, employees, suppliers had no recourse under this framework. While this mechanism was useful for individual debtors or small businesses with tangible assets, the DRT system was insufficient for resolving the complex financial distress of larger corporate entities. The process was slow and lacked a comprehensive approach to corporate restructuring. Another recovery mechanism was under the Sikh Industrial Companies Act. This act was enacted in 1985 and was designed to help the industrial companies facing financial difficulties. It allowed them to approach the Board for Industrial and Financial Reconstruction for restructuring and financial revival. However, one of the major drawbacks of this redressal mechanism was that SICA was only applicable to industrial companies, which left out other sectors that were also facing financial distress. Further, there was a lack of timely resolution as SICA did not impose any strict timelines for the restructuring process, leading to massive delays. The lack of time-bound resolution led to significant value erosion, with companies languishing in the system for years. Also, in practice, the process was largely driven by secured creditors who had the final say on whether a revival plan was acceptable or no. This meant that the interests of other creditors, like operational creditors, were often ignored. Lastly, we had the BIFR revival schemes in the pre-IBC era. The BIFR would decide on the revival of Sikh companies by approving a revival scheme that the creditors could propose. If the scheme was accepted by the court, it would allow the company to resume operation. However, there were no time limits for the submission or approval of the revival plans in this mechanism. This led to a lack of urgency in resolving distressed cases, which increased the financial difficulties of companies and creditors. Even when the revival schemes were proposed, they often faced bureaucratic hurdles and delays, and many schemes were never fully implemented at all. The BIFR process was limited in scope and did not provide a comprehensive framework for resolving insolvency, especially for large corporations or non-industrial sectors. To sum it all up, we can see that the processes under the pre-IBC frameworks were inefficient and full of delays. There was a lack of coordination because of multiple overlapping laws and agencies, which made it difficult to have a coordinated approach, resulting in inconsistent outcomes and prolonged litigations. In almost all the redressal mechanisms, the operational creditors, like the suppliers or the employees, were often left out or were at a disadvantage compared to the secured creditors, and focus was primarily on liquidation rather than revival of the corporate debtor. These issues were identified by the Bankruptcy Law Reforms Committee in their report in 2015, which was actually the foundation for the IBC. The idea was to consolidate and amend the laws relating to insolvency in a time-bound manner for maximization of value of assets, to promote entrepreneurship, availability of credit, and balance the interest of all the stakeholders. This was the story behind the introduction and implementation of IBC in India. While the IBC has been a game changer in bringing faster resolutions, reduction in NPAs, boost in the ease of doing business, and a focus on revival over liquidation, there are still certain loopholes and challenges that remain to be addressed in the insolvency regime in India. 4. Continuous improvements in judicial efficiency, institutional capacity, and creditor rights protection are essential to ensure its long-term success.